Good day, students, and welcome to another lecture series in geography. I'm your host, Donovan Rattray. Today, we will be looking at limestone environment. So we're going to be exploring the limestone rocks and the kind of environment or landscape within which they exist. And in doing so, we will see what are the features both beneath the surface as well as on the surface of the limestone and how they are formed. We're also going to explore the cockpit country in Jamaica and to explore even deeper the importance of limestone environments. So stick around and pay keen attention. So one of the most important things we need to know is what is limestone really? Now limestone is what we also refer to as calcium carbonate. Now calcium carbonate or limestone is composed mainly of corals. It also has shells and calcium carbonate, CaCO3, which is the other name for limestone. What makes limestone so unique among the different types of rocks is that one, it is permeable, which means that it allows water to pass through it. Now water passes through limestone via pores or small holes in the limestone, fractures or fissures in the limestone, as well as joints within the limestone, because the limestone itself is a jointed kind of structure. Limestone is also composed of calcium. Yes, the mineral calcium is the chief mineral within limestone. It also has a distinctive bedding plane and jointed patterns, as we said earlier, making it permeable. In other words, then allowing it to pass water through. Now, because limestone reacts with water, it is prone to dissolving, just like any other minerals like sugar or salt, for that matter, when in water. And the factors that influences this process are the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, soil, and groundwater. When carbon dioxide reacts with water, it turns the water into a weak acid known as carbonic acid. Now this carbonic acid is, even though it is weak, it is strong enough to dissolve the calcium carbonate within the limestone, turning it into calcium bicarbonate, within which it removes in solution. So the more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the faster the rate of decomposition, or should I say solution or dissolving of the limestone. The amount of water that is in contact with the limestone is also another reason why limestone can either dissolve quickly or slowly. So the more water that is actually in contact with the limestone, the faster the rate of solution. The less water, the slower the rate of solution. Limestone breaks down easily via solution in warm temperatures. So the warmer or hotter the conditions, the faster the rate of limestone solution. The speed of the water also affects it, because the faster water is moving within a limestone landscape, the faster the rate of solution as well. The presence of organic acids in vegetation are also important, because vegetation, when decomposing, tend to release an acid known as humic acid. Now this acid that is released upon decomposing is strong enough to also dissolve the limestone or make it even weaker, thus making it prone to being dissolved even easier by water. Since we carry out daily activities as humans, well, our daily activities also influence the rate of solution within a limestone environment. For example, whenever we burn fossil fuels, we release a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now remember, carbon dioxide when mixed with water turns it into a weak acid known as carbonic acid, which when it interacts with the limestone turns it into calcium bicarbonate and thereby removing it in solution. The acidity of rainwater is also increased when we release chemicals like sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide in the atmosphere. Limestones are vital to us in various ways. Yes, limestone. Well, for example, limestone provides us with fresh groundwater. The limestone, being permeable, allows water to pass through it, and as the water is passing through it, it is being filtered. That means all the impurities that the water had encountered on its way to the surface is removed by the limestone. At the same time, minerals present in the limestone will be added to the water. So the water is going to actually make its way to the impermeable layer of rock beneath the surface, right? And come out as clean, pristine springs. And you notice spring water has a different taste than regular tap water, right? Yeah, because of the minerals present in it, as it is filtered right through the limestone. Limestone is also used in the production of cement, alumina, as well as iron and steel. Now, limestone is also crushed and used in the construction industry. Additionally, limestone is also cut into blocks so it can make building materials. The drainage pattern in limestone areas consists of joints, fractures, and pores. Now, as the water passes through the openings, the calcium in the limestone is dissolved, thereby making the openings larger. A few rivers in limestone areas flow on the surface, as in the Great River in Jamaica. It has cut rapidly down through the rock and flow through a narrow gorge. So now let us look at limestone features, and we're going to look at those features that are beneath the surface of the limestone. The first one we're looking at are caves. Now, here is a photograph, or should I say a diagram of a cave, and within the cave are also features. So along the roof you have sharp or pointed pinnacles hanging down. These are what we call stalactites. On the floor you have pinnacles growing upwards, and these are what we call stalagmites. Now, it just so happened that sometimes the stalactites and the stalagmites grow and meet into each other, forming a continuous pillar or column. In the cave also, you will have water flowing in the cave, or groundwater. And this is because water is coming from the surface and entering into the cave itself. Now, the cave itself is actually a cavity or a hollow within the limestone rock beneath the surface. And we're going to show you how this occurs. But first of all, here we have a photograph of the Harrison Cave in Barbados. And as you can see carefully along the roof, you see the same pointy pinnacles hanging down, the stalactites. And if you look along the floor of the cave, you're also going to see stalagmites growing along the floor as well. But if you look even closer, you will also see water flowing in the cave itself. And that water is coming from the surface as it passes through the limestone and make its way into the cave. That is fresh, clean water that has just been filtered. And that is the reason why when you go at the mouth of a spring, if you've ever been to the mouth of a spring, the water is extremely pristine, very clean, very clear. And the taste of the water also is significantly different than that of your regular pipe water or even bottled water. This is a photograph of the Carlsbad Cavern in United States. Now, there's a difference between a cave and a cavern. A cavern is a much larger cave. So the difference between a simple cave and a cavern is simply the size, because a cavern is much larger than the average cave. So let's look at how caves are formed. Whenever rainwater interacts or makes contact with the surface, the water penetrates the surface and infiltrates the rock or the limestone rock beneath. In other words, then it moves right down through the limestone rock because the limestone is a permeable rock because it has joints and pores or even fractures in it that allows water to pass through. As the water is passing through the limestone or percolating through the limestone, it will encounter a layer of impermeable rock. That is the layer of rock that doesn't allow water to pass through. And when it encounters this layer of rock, for example, clay, the water will eventually build up or rise beneath the surface. Now, as the water being what we call a weak acid known as carbonic acid, right? The water is going to now turn the limestone or the calcium carbonate into calcium bicarbonate, which is the solution or the compound in which it actually removes the limestone. So it will dissolve the limestone by turning it into calcium bicarbonate. Now, as the water level decreases or gets lower, it will slowly dissolve the limestone and create a hollow or an opening, or should I say a cavity beneath the earth's surface within the limestone. Now this cavity or hollow that is being created as the limestone is dissolved under the surface is what we call a cave. And remember, a larger cave is what we call a cavern. So we have some examples of caves in the Caribbean. For example, the Two Sister Cave in Jamaica. We also have the Harrison Cave in Barbados. All right. And we also have the Green Grotto Caves in Jamaica. So there are quite a number of caves that we can use as examples within the Caribbean. But as a cavern, we have the Carlsbad Cavern, and that is in the United States. All right, now as you can see, as the rain is falling and it goes through the limestone, it moves all the way down until it encounters a layer of impermeable rock. So it cannot pass this layer of rock. The water basically rises within the limestone, and as it rises within the limestone, because it is a weak acid known as carbonic acid, it is going to dissolve the limestone, leaving a hollow or a cavity within the limestone itself. And that is how caves are formed. Have a good look at it again.
Unearth the adventure at Harrison's Cave, Barbados. Located 100 miles to the east of the Caribbean island chain, Barbados is distinguished by a unique coral limestone base. This creates the benefit of clear, portable water, white sandy beaches, and soil of excellent agricultural properties. Situated in the central uplands of Barbados is what is known as the Heart of Barbados. This region is rich in heritage, culture, and natural beauty, the most beautiful being Harrison's Cave. A magnificent crystallized limestone cavern, Harrison's Cave is said to be one of the wonders of the world. Its pure, clear water and flowing streams help to create the beautiful stalactites and stalagmites which propagate the cave. As you journey through this living cave, you'll be amazed by nature's mastery. You will hear the rushing of the streams and see the calm, glassy pools. You'll be amazed by the different shapes and sizes of the stalactites and stalagmites and delight in the delicate floor stone formations. You will see the early explorers' entrance and learn about their adventures. Traveling by tram in safety and comfort, you'll be directed by knowledgeable tour guides who will point out the various structures as well as new formations which are continually growing in this living cave. At select points, you can disembark from the tram for a closer look. At Harrison's Cave, our focus is to ensure that you have a memorable experience. Come visit us and unearth the adventure at Harrison's Cave, Barbados.
All right, so when you go to Barbados, make it your point of duty to go and visit the Harrison Cave. I'm sure it's going to be a breathtaking adventure. So, as you can see, within the cave, there are features. And the first of the features that we're going to be looking at are the stalactites. Now, the stalactites are these slender downward hanging pinnacles on the roof of caves. Now, these are formed when water is dripping from the roof of the cave, right? So the water is coming through the limestone. Now, when it reaches the roof of the cave, it's going to drip from the roof of the cave. The water remaining on the roof of the cave is going to be evaporated, leaving a thin film or sheet of calcite. Over many years after constant dripping of the water, the calcite is going to build up layer by layer until it grows downwards, forming a slender and isolated pinnacle. and this is what we call the stalactite. Let me show you what I mean here. So here are stalactites. These are stalactites. Now, the next feature are stalagmites, and these are basically deposits of calcites growing from the floor of the cave, and they are more rounded in appearance. Now, these are formed that as water is dripping from the roof, it carries with it some calcite as well. Now, this water that is dripping from the roof is going to spread on the floor and evaporate, leaving a thin film of calcite. Over many thousands of years of constant dripping and depositing of calcite on the floor, it is going to build up layer by layer and eventually become rounded and form what is called a stalagmite. So here we have a photograph of stalagmites. All right. So here are the stalagmites. Some are tall, some are short, but they're still stalagmites. Pillars or columns are formed when stalactites and stalagmites grow and actually meet. When they meet, they form what is called a continuous pillar or column. And here we have a photograph of a pillar, and I'm sure you can see the point at which they actually meet right here. This is where they actually meet. All right, so you have the stalactite growing all the way from up here, the stalagmite growing up here, and this is where they actually meet. You can see where they actually meet. In the background, you have some pillars as well. Here's another one, and as you can see, exactly where they meet. Here we have some more pillars. Now, is this a pillar? It is not a pillar because, as you can see, we have a stalactite, we have a stalagmite, but they have not touched. If they do not touch, they are not considered to be, it is not considered to be a pillar. It's just two separate features at this point. But when they grow into each other and eventually touch or meet, that is when they call it a pillar. So here we have a diagram now showing you how the stalactites and the stalagmites are formed. And as you can see, the water is dripping from the roof of the cave, and as it's dripping, layer by layer of calcite is deposited and eventually build up and move downwards to form that slender or pointed pinnacle that we call a stalactite. But at the same time, the water dripping from the roof also drips on the floor, and it evaporates just like the water is evaporating on the roof. Alright, to leave a thin layer of calcite. It also evaporates on the floor, leaving a thin layer of calcite. And as you can see, they build up layer by layer and become rounded since it's growing from the ground, and therefore they form what is called a stalagmite. So when the stalagmite and the stalactites eventually meet, they form what is called a pillar or a column.
As rivers flow underground through swallow holes, Carbonation enlarges the passages through which they flow to make caves. Some of these caves can then be further widened to create large chambers called caverns, such as those seen in the Burren in County Clare. The water carries dissolved limestone with it. When the water evaporates, it causes deposits of limestone called calcite to form. Calcite builds up over time to form stalactites on the roof of a cavern and stalagmites on the floor. Over thousands of years, stalactites and stalagmites can meet, forming a pillar or column.
As falling rain passes through the soil layers, carbon dioxide and other minerals from decaying matters are trapped within the solution. Upon reaching the cave, the water droplets fall and the carbon dioxide is released, leaving behind tiny calcite crystals. These mineral deposits are what form all of the cave decorations. Let's take a closer look at some common cave formations. Over here, we have the dripstones. Soda straws are thin-walled, hollow formations that resemble drinking straws. As water drips slowly from the roof of the cave, it deposits a microscopic ring of calcite crystal. Stalactites hang from the cave roof. Nearly all stalactites start their life as a straw. When the straw becomes blocked with calcite or impurities, the stalactite starts to develop and thicken over the years, from the solution which runs down its outer surface. Conversely, stalagmites grow upwards from the cave floor due to the accumulation of material deposited from ceiling drippings. Stalactites and stalagmites can eventually join from floor to ceiling to become columns or pillars. However, the process may take up to 100,000 years.
So those are the limestone underground features. Now we're going to look at the limestone surface features. Now the first ones we're looking at are clints and grikes, and these are pretty simple to understand. Now basically the surface of or area of limestone is what we call a limestone pavement, and the limestone pavement is fretted, or should I say has what we call cracks, all right, running either vertically or horizontally. Now when rain falls, remember the rain is what we call carbonic acid because it's a weak acid since it mixes with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, right? So the carbonic acid in the form of rainwater flows along the surface, and it also flows within the fractures or cracks on the limestone pavement. Now as the water is flowing through the limestone pavement or through the cracks on the limestone pavement, it will dissolve the limestone by a process known as carbonation, where the carbonic acid dissolves the limestone. All right, and as it dissolves the limestone, the cracks get wider and they get deeper over a period of time. This will form deep cracks or deep fractures or spaces within the limestone pavement known as grikes, and the rocks between these spaces are what we call the clints. Here we have a diagram showing you the clints and the grikes. As you can see, the grikes are the spaces that have been carved out by the rainwater over many period of years. So it get wider and get deeper as the rainwater or the carbonic acid dissolves the limestone. All right, and the rocks that are there are what we call the clints. So the rocks adjacent to the spaces or the openings in the limestone pavement is what we call the clints. All right, and the spaces that are between the rocks are what we call the grikes.
Limestone pavement. Rainwater falls onto the exposed limestone. This passes through vertical joints in the rock, creating a weak carbonic acid. Carbonation then causes weathering of both the entire surface and the joints, and they become wider. This process creates grooves or gaps on the pavement called grikes. The blocks that are left in between are called clints. The combination of these features creates a landscape known as limestone pavement.
So here we have a limestone pavement, and as you can see, the rocks are the clints, and the spaces that have been made wider and deeper due to carbonation by rainwater or carbonic acid are what we call the grikes. This is a photograph of another limestone pavement, and as you can see, the spaces are the grikes and the rocks are. The next surface limestone feature are called swallow holes or sinkholes. All right, now these are formed in various ways. Swallow holes or sinkholes can be formed where you have a river flowing along a limestone bed, all right, or flowing on a limestone surface. Over time, the fracture or joint along the course of the river will allow water to pass through, and as the water is constantly being passed through the limestone, it will what? Dissolve the limestone, because the water itself is what we call a weak acid known as carbonic acid, since the water interacts with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, as it continues to erode the rock by solution, it will get wider and deeper, eventually creating a swallow hole, and the river will eventually go down into the swallow hole and stop flowing further downstream and instead flow underground. So that is one way by which a swallow hole or sinkholes are formed, when a river erodes a fracture along the bed, making it deeper and wider, and over time creating what we call a swallow hole, and eventually going down into the swallow hole and disappearing into the swallow hole underground. Right, so that's how a swallow hole is formed. It can also be formed by a river. Some swallow holes are also formed when the roof of caves beneath the surface collapse, forming a deep hollow. All right, and this is what we call a swallow hole. Swallow holes can also be formed when clints and grikes are made deeper and wider, or are enlarged, and that's another way by which swallow holes can be formed. So clints and grikes can be made wider or deeper by the process of carbonation, where the water dissolves the limestone, creating swallow holes. So here we have a diagram of a swallow hole being created as a result of the roof of a cave collapsing. So here are the rubbles of the cave that has collapsed, hence creating this sinkhole. Here's another diagram right here showing the cave roof collapsing, creating a sinkhole right here. And we can also say a sinkhole is also right here as well. All right.
Swallow hole. Rivers also dissolve limestone. A river which may begin in a non-limestone area can disappear underground when it reaches a limestone surface. This occurs because the water widens the joints and the bedding planes of the limestone rock through carbonation. The river will then disappear underground through a swallow hole.
This is a photograph of a swallow hole, And as you can see, the river disappearing into the swallow hole, no longer flowing further downstream. It disappears beneath the surface into the swallow hole. And this would become the underground river that you would often find in caves. It will eventually re-emerge somewhere else, many miles down slope, and this is what they call a spring or a resurgent stream. One good example of such a resurgent stream in the Caribbean would be the Black River in St. Elizabeth. I could also add the Martha Brae River in Trelawney to that as well. All right, now here we have a diagram showing you the limestone pavement, and on the limestone pavement you can see the rocks known as the clints and the space between them known as the grikes. Now, but our main feature though are the sinkholes. So here are the sinkholes, and here's another sinkhole or swallow hole right here where the river has disappeared, and the river is going to now flow beneath the surface because it encounters a layer of impermeable rock. Remember, the impermeable rock is a layer of rock that does not allow water to pass through. So the water will flow along this impermeable rock and may re-emerge miles down slope as a spring or resurgent stream. Okay, so there we have it. So in our cave, it's flowing through our cave too, and in the cave you notice the three features in the cave: stalactites, stalagmites, and the pillar. And the pillars form when the stalactites and stalagmites meet, and the stalactites are formed when calcite is evaporating from the roof as the water is dripping from the roof, creating a layer of calcite, and many years later it builds up into that. Similarly, or conversely, you have the water dripping to the floor, building up layers of calcite over time as the water evaporates, and then it will form a rounded pinnacle rising from the floor known as a stalagmite. So I'm just going over all of these just to reinforce their formation. And as you can remember, clints and grikes occur on the limestone pavement as a result of water flowing through the joints or the cracks along the surface, and through carbonation they get wider and deeper, forming that type of feature known as clints and grikes. Dolines. A much larger swallow hole is what we call a doline, but dolines can also be formed when the roof of caves collapse, leaving a large opening or hollow in the limestone surface. However, a much larger doline is what we call a pulgey. All right, so it's a much larger depression or opening on the limestone surface, uh, larger than a doline. So as you can see, the difference between them here is the size. A good example of a pulgey is the Queen of Spain Valley in Jamaica. I also want to make note too that dolines can also be, or should I say, dolines can also be formed when the walls of two adjacent sinkholes or swallow holes actually collapse and eventually forming a larger depression known as a doline. Similarly, when two dolines are next to each other, the wall between them can also collapse, creating a much larger depression known as a pulgey. So a pulgey can be formed when the roof of a large cave beneath the surface collapses. It can also form when the wall separating two adjacent dolines collapse and joining the two, creating a much larger depression. I'm going to show you something here. Alright, so this diagram shows you the various ways by which dolines are formed. Here we have the roof of a cave collapsing. A doline can also be formed where the fissure, alright, that is also where the rocks collapse, alright, along the surface here due to corrosion. Sometimes the soil that is situated over a fissure or a fracture in the limestone is collapsed into that fissure or fracture, creating another doline. All right. We also have a situation where the rock collapses beneath the surface, and sometimes the soil gets washed down into the fissure, creating a large opening known as a doline. We have a buried doline here that is covered by soil, and eventually over time it's going to get washed down into the fracture, almost like a funnel, and creating this doline right here. So these are the ways by which dolines are formed. Here's a photograph of a doline. Alright, so that's the doline right there. And here's a diagram showing a pulgey. This is the pulgey, a much larger opening than a doline. And they are so large that sometimes you can find entire towns in there. And that is what we call the pulgey. Oh, by the way, another word for a pulgey is a uvala, U-V-A-L-A. In some countries, pulgeys are called uvalas or uvalas, U-V-A-L-A. All right, but it's the same structure. I remembered back then that in some sources, you would have some people distinguish between the two, where they say like a larger pulgey is what you call a uvala. But over time, they have agreed that either way, a pulgey and a uvala are basically the same thing. So another way by which, another name by which we know pulgeys are uvalas. So depending on the source or the country, the pulgey gets another name. So it is also known as a uvala or uvala, U-V-A-L-A. Here we have a Google Earth image. We have a Google Earth image here of Jamaica, or part of Jamaica. And this entire area here that is hollow is what we call the Queen of Spain Valley. All right, that's the Queen of Spain Valley. That entire area that is encircled is what we call the Queen of Spain Valley. And this is in Jamaica. Now, I'm going to show you another image. Now, here we have a profile of the area. All right. So if you look down here, you see where you have a depression here. That line is, this line here is drawn along the entire Queen of Spain Valley. All right. Now what it does, it also gives you the elevation. All right. It gives you the elevation. So you have the highest points here, and then now deep down you have a depression, and this is the depression right here we're talking about. So this depression is what we call the Queen of Spain Valley, otherwise known as a pulgey, or as I said, depending on the area that you are from, it is called a uvala or uvala for those people who are not of Caribbean heritage. Good. So that is a good example of a uvala or a pulgey in the Caribbean, the Queen of Spain Valley, right here in Jamaica. There it is again, I circled it. This is a photograph of a Pulgi. All right. Here is another Pulgi. And by the way, these photographs are in Europe. Next, we have what we call resurgent streams or springs. And these are formed when a river further upstream enters a sinkhole or a swallow hole and then begin to flow beneath the surface through the cave. All right. Now, as it is flowing through the surface, or should I say, it is flowing through the cave beneath the surface, right? It's flowing because it encounters a layer of impermeable rock. Remember, impermeable rock is the rock that does not allow water to pass through. So when it goes down the sinkhole, it will encounter a layer of impermeable rock and it will flow right through the cave or through the limestone and then re-emerge or reappear elsewhere along the path and come out as a spring or a stream or a resurgent stream. So one good example of this is the Black River in Jamaica. Jamaica's largest river is actually a resurgent stream or a spring, if you want to put that. But we prefer to call it a resurgent stream because a larger spring is what we call a resurgent stream. All right. So the Black River is one good example. Another very good example of a resurgent stream in Jamaica is the Martha Brae River. As a matter of fact, the Martha Brae River is basically formed as by a combination of several resurgent streams or springs merging together at some point, creating one large river. And this is what we call the Martha Brae River. So here we have a photograph showing you a spring or a resurgent stream. So right here we have a layer of permeable rock. Up here we have a layer of permeable rock. And down here now we have a layer of impermeable rock along which the stream is flowing. Here's another angle. So this rock up here is the permeable rock. It's the layer that allows the water to pass through. And down here now we have the layer of impermeable rock, the layer that the water cannot pass through. So the water flows along this path and re-emerges right here. So we call it a resurgent stream or a spring. And depending on the size of the opening, if it's a large opening, we call it a resurgent stream. If it's a small opening, we call it a spring. Mika. All right, so there you have it. Journey. You actually get to see the journey of a river going down the swallow hole and then under the ground and then now re-emerging as a resurgent spring or stream. All right, good. So let's move on to another feature now. So let's move on to another feature, right? Known as the dry valley. Now, basically, as the name implies, it is a valley that is dry. There is no river flowing through this valley. And this is because there can either be water being divergent upstream as a result of man-made influence. So they may be diverting the water for agricultural purposes. And because of that now, water doesn't flow further downstream. So you end up having a dry valley being created as a result, especially if it's a limestone area. A dry valley can also be created when the roof of a cave also collapse. Another way by which a dry valley can be created too is when the stream that went a stream further upstream, right, or further up the slope, disappears into a sinkhole, and because of that, the remaining part of the course remains without water. Hence, you have a dry valley being created. A dry valley can also be created where you have an area that has a very extremely hot climate, and therefore you'll also have low precipitation and end up having a dry valley. All right. So here we have a photograph of a dry valley. Here's a photograph of a dry valley in an area with an extremely hot climate. We have water being diverted here. As you can see, the water being diverted away from the river, and therefore you tend to have the river not flowing further downstream. So you'll have a dry valley being somewhere downstream. Right, so here's a photograph now showing the stream disappearing in a sinkhole. All right, and as you can see, the stream is not flowing any further downstream. It's disappeared under the surface, and that is going to now cause a dry valley to be formed further downstream since there is no water flowing through it. Just wanted to have a look at this diagram, and as you can make out some swallow holes, and the swallow holes have streams disappearing down there, the swallow holes, down the shaft of the swallow holes. And as you can see, they encounter a layer of impermeable rock, and they begin to flow along that layer of impermeable rock and eventually emerging on the surface further downstream. And this is what we call resurgent streams. Or in some cases, if they are much smaller, we call them springs. Okay, so now that we have looked at the different underground underground features as well as surface limestone features, and we have seen how they are formed and so on, right? We are now going to look at karst landscapes within the Caribbean. Now, the word karst is a Germanic word which describes a limestone area in another European country known as Slovenia. The word karst actually comes uh, from one of these regions, and it actually means rock. All right, that's what the word karst, the origin of the word karst means. It means rock. So it's actually a Germanic word that describes a limestone region within Slovenia, which is a European country. All right, so we're going to look at the karst landscapes within the Caribbean. But first, I want to show you this diagram here. And this diagram basically is bringing us back a little because I want to show you what we have looked at already. We have looked at sinkholes, and we have seen where some sinkholes are formed when the roofs of caves collapse. We also have caves in the process of formation underground as a result of carbonation, where the limestone is being dissolved by the water, which is itself a weak acid, right? So we have our sinkholes. We also have our spring emerging as a result of water beneath the surface now coming onto the surface. So we have springs or even resurgent streams in some case. Now, where you have a sinkhole along the course of a river, the river is going to disappear in that sinkhole and go beneath the surface. And right here, this area along here that has no water flowing is what we consider to be what? Who remembers? What kind of a valley is it? It is a dry valley. Good. So it's a dry valley right here. And right here where the water that has disappeared up here now re-emerging down here is what we call a resurgent stream, or a spring. All right, depending on the size. But most likely it's what we call a resurgent stream right here, because the water which was up here disappeared in the sinkhole here and re-emerged right here. And between the point where it sinks beneath the surface and re-emerges, you have an area void of water known as a dry valley. Okay, so this feature basically brings us back. So before we can go forward, we want to just take a little moment to go back to what we have already looked at. All right, at least most of what we have already looked at. Okay, so there is our dry valley. So as I said a while ago, karst is the general term for all landforms in a limestone landscape. A very good example of this are Jamaica and Puerto Rico. Now, the conditions that allow for limestone landforms or karst landforms to be formed has to do with the type of limestone, the climate of the area, and like I said, if it's a warm climate, the rate of solution is going to be greater. The amount of time the rock have been exposed to weathering and erosion, so time is a good factor here. Other structural features such as faults and folds must be present in the area. These allow for the solution of rocks to create features as well. So what are the different types of karsts in the Caribbean? Well, there are actually two types of karsts found in the Caribbean. The first one is known as a polygonal karst or a cockpit karst. Well, we call it cockpit because the area kind of resembles that of a cockfighting ring or a cockpit, where the dirt looks very rugged, where the cocks were fighting. So the landscape kind of resembles that, and that is how it comes by the term cockpit karst. All right, but the technical name for it is polygonal karst, and these are basically pitted with smooth-sided soil, covered depressions, and cone-like hills. Here we have a diagram showing that. So here we have our conical hills right here. Here's another one right here, and this is a photograph showing you the cockpit karst. This is a aerial view of the cockpit country. As you can see, rounded hills. All right, these are all rounded hills, and in between the rounded hills we have depressions, and these hills and depressions are covered with soil. This is a cockpit karst right here, and this is in the parish of Trelawney. This is a single cockpit karst, and you can see people actually live in these areas. This is in the cockpit country in Trelawney. Cockpit karst are formed when the limestone, for example, well, it starts out like a flat area, and the limestone pavement being fretted or crisscrossed with fractures along the surface. Now, as the rainwater flows through the surface, over time the fractures get wider and deeper. Now, as they get wider and deeper, you'll have the formation of clints and grikes. However, as the process continues, they get deeper and even wider, and eventually forming isolated hills known as cockpits or polygonal karsts, and that is how they are actually formed. The next type of karst are tower karst, which is a landscape featured by upstanding rounded blocks set in an area of low relief. And this is what they look like. They look like towers. Very slender, all right, not as low and rounded like the cockpit karst, and they can be quite isolated from each other. Here we have a diagram showing them as well, and you have rivers flowing in between, and the rivers play an important role in them being eroded and being isolated as they are. This is an area in China, and as you can see, we have one tower karst here. Here we have another way in the background. This is another one. Here's another one. That's another one. Don't forget that one way around the back. There you have it. So those are tower karsts. Changes in the Caribbean landscape. Human activities. All right. We tend to have forests being cleared, and because of that, it affects groundwater. We have groundwater being extracted or being diverted from the karst areas in the Caribbean as well, and this can cause some issues or environmental issues. Forests are also cleared for the use of agricultural purposes in the cockpit or even in the karst regions of the Caribbean. Now, what this also does is that it will also affect the water supply and contaminate water as well. Often, we tend to have waste matter or chemicals being released into the karst areas, especially where water sources are in the karst area. And sometimes these wastes that are released can clog up sinkholes and eventually can lead to flooding of surrounding areas. Most primary forests are cleared for the purpose of lumbering or agriculture. A good example of this is the cockpit country in Jamaica. Tourism is also a thriving industry in places like Barbados and Jamaica. For example, the Runaway Bay Caves in Jamaica and the Harrison Cave in Barbados. And urbanization also takes place as a result of building materials being used or extracted from the cockpit country or the limestone areas, I should say. A good example of this is Port-au-Prince in Haiti where they actually extract materials used for um, used for the construction industry. They also contaminate the water supply in this area due to the release of sewage, and this may also be detrimental to humans because what happens is that the water becomes contaminated, and the water that is drawn from these areas eventually um, are used by the public, and they themselves will contract diseases and become ill. So here we have an area in the cockpit country being removed for the use of bauxite mining, which is a major threat to the cockpit country. However, we tend to have the good side here. We have tourism industry, rafting there, and we also have nature lovers in the hills taking photographs of exotic plants and creatures. I can bet you that they're not just looking at the plant, but they're looking at the world's smallest crab that is in the cockpit country. All right, you'll see that there. They tend to live within the base of plants like that one. I've been there and I've seen one, so I can tell you that I'm sure it's not just a plant they're looking at, but they're looking at the world's smallest crab. Of course, the cockpit country is valued for its limestone, and karst areas are valued for their limestone. So you tend to have quarrying going on in these areas, and the limestone are used as valuable building materials. So karst areas are constantly under threat because water is taken from the karst areas and are used to supply urban areas. Now, because of this, you're going to have a lack of water within the limestone regions or the karst areas, especially the caves. Would find that you'd find that the caves have decreasing water or eventually don't have any more water, and this is going to change up the environment within the cave, and therefore the creatures within the cave that depend on the stability of the cave's environment will eventually die because the conditions within the cave has now changed as a result of the lack of water within the caves. Caves are also destroyed due to mining, but more severely though, um, pollutants such as sewage are dumped into the the karst areas, and what happens is that now being dumped into the karst areas mean that the bacteria or viruses in them is going to go down into the water supply, and the water that is drawn from the karst areas are going to be consumed by people. All right, so that means they are now going to be putting their health in at risk, that is. So here we have a diagram showing various ways by which um, the dumping of waste and chemicals and sewage can enter the groundwater system and eventually enter into our pipes. All right, so as you can see, different areas where they are dumping their waste, whether it is going to be chemical or sewage or solid waste, whatever, and they enter into the water supply within the aquifer. Now, an aquifer is rock that bears or holds water. So the limestone is an aquifer. It actually holds or bears water. All right, and therefore the water is going to be extracted from the limestone and sent into people's pipes with all these contaminants in there. And that is the reason why, for example, the NWC and other water controlling authorities, they tend to treat the water before they release it to the public. But sometimes the treatment alone is not all that effective. But they do that just to ensure that whatever contaminants are in the water, they can minimize it so as to not put other people's health at risk. Additionally, this is another diagram showing you waste being dumped, solid waste being dumped into a sinkhole, and this can clog up sinkholes. So in times of heavy rains, you may have flooding taking place. We have a septic tank going all the way down into the limestone structure. So you know the sewage is going to end up into the water supply down here and eventually come out through the spring. And that can be very detrimental to the health of anyone downstream where that spring is flowing towards. All right, so in looking at a case study, we have Jamaica here. All right, so there are many types of limestone in Jamaica. The purest type is the white limestone, and then there is the yellow limestone, which contains impurities. And then you have the coral limestone found along the coast. Jamaica has a warm climate with fairly high rainfall, which is aided by the decomposition of vegetation by speeding up the weathering process. Some areas in Jamaica have been exposed to weathering and erosion for several millions of years. Elsewhere, there is much younger coral limestone. Jamaica's limestone has been fissured by a large number of faults, and by fissured I mean it has cracks or fractures. So let us look at the cockpit country. All right. Now the cockpit country is basically pure limestone which is crisscrossed by patterns of joints. And in these areas we have clints and grikes also. Now these have been weathered to form small conical hills and depressions. The hills have very little soil and are covered by thick woodlands and forest. Pockets of red soil have been collected in the depressions or cockpits, only accessible by long winding paths. There is no permanent surface water in the cockpit country. The hills have very little soil and are covered by thick woodlands. Roads are difficult to build in the cockpit country because the broken landscape. There are few human settlements. Cockpits have been formed on the limestone because it is more strongly jointed and more easily dissolved. Some cockpits are elongated to the north. On the yellow limestone, there are some depressions and the land slopes more gently in more easily settled and cultivated. And it is more easily settled and cultivated. Okay, so if you want to know what the boundaries of the cockpit country is like, here you have it. This area right here, that is the boundary of the cockpit country. That's the cockpit country you're looking at. And in Jamaica, the cockpit country, part of the cockpit country is in St. Elizabeth. Part of it, a small portion is right there in Manchester, but most of it is in Trelawney and part of it is in St. Anne. And we can also make out a portion in St. James as well. Nope, none of it is in St. Anne, sorry. Most of it is in Trelawney, part of it is in St. Elizabeth, and there's a part of it in St. Elizabeth known as Accompong. You know about the Accompong Maroons, and part of it is also in St. James. Here we have a close-up as to the boundary of the cockpit country. The darker green area here, this is the cockpit country's boundary you're looking at. And as you can see, there are some communities on the outskirts, like Albertown in Trelawney, Clarkstown also in Trelawney. All right, we have Wakefield, we have Maroontown, and Eldersley as well. Here is an aerial photograph of the cockpit country. The cockpit country is very important because what? Wildlife. It's a wildlife habitat. The thing about the cockpit country is that a lot of the creatures that are found in the cockpit country are endemic to the cockpit country. That means they are found nowhere else in Jamaica, nowhere else in the world. It is also the home of the world's second largest butterfly, which is a giant swallowtail butterfly. You can also find the world's smallest crab or land crab in the cockpit country as well. All right, and there is a type of snake in the cockpit country you will find in no other part of Jamaica and no other part of the world as well. So a lot of the birds and plants as well as other creatures, they are endemic to the cockpit country. That means you will not find them anywhere else in Jamaica or anywhere else in the world. Only in the cockpit country you'll find them, because the cockpit country itself is like a microclimate all on its own. It's like an ecosystem of its own. All right, it's an ecosystem of its own. And because of this unique ecosystem, you'll find unique creatures and plants there that are endemic only to this area. All right, so there you see it. Those are just a few of the endemic creatures that you'll find in the cockpit country. And the cockpit country is like a buzz of amazing wildlife. It's incredible biodiversity. Well, another importance of the cockpit country is that it has water supply, great water supply. The cockpit country provides water for at least 5 different parishes, and it is also the source of at least 3 of Jamaica's most prominent rivers. You have the Martha Brae in Trelawney, the Hector's River, just on the border of Manchester and Trelawney. You also have the Rio Bueno River, and then you have the Black River in St. Elizabeth. The cockpit country is a major source of fresh water in Jamaica, where it supplies 5 parishes, in which it is used for agricultural, domestic, as well as industrial purposes. Because it goes through a natural filtration process where minerals are added, gives it its rich characteristic flavor as well as its clear, pristine appearance, thus making it one of the most sorted out waters anywhere on this planet, as cruise ships come into Falmouth in order to purchase this valuable commodity to give its passengers. It is also the source of at least 3 of Jamaica's prominent rivers, the Hector's River, the Martha Brae, as well as the Black River. As you can see, when it comes on to the rivers, or should I say water in the cockpit country, it's all good. Finally, the cockpit country is of historical significance because this was the bastion or is still the bastion of Jamaica's first set of independent set of people prior to slavery, the Maroons. These Maroons were so fierce that they put up resistance against the British Army for many years, till eventually the British relented and eventually signed a peace treaty with a lot of goodies for the Maroons. So as you can see, the Maroons are still alive and active. Now, with that said, we want to look at the threats of the cockpit country. Clearing of the forest is definitely one of the biggest threats, especially for the purpose of logging or bauxite mining. Illegal hunting of birds are threatening the species as well, and the removal of forest trees for the making of charcoal. Those are the threats to the cockpit country. Now, with that said, we have come to the end of our lesson on limestone environment, limestone features. Thank you very much for paying attention and tuning in to today's lesson. I hope you learned something new. And remember to leave your comments. Also remember to click a like, subscribe, and just remember to click on the notification button. So, thank you very much for joining me. Have yourselves a great day. Continue to love geography with all thy might and keep well. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.